All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have a demo that might take up a decent portion of this. So hopefully everybody's here for the Exchange public folder migration session. The main focus of this is going to be an on-premises deployment, and we'll walk through the demo there and also take a look at some of the steps for migrating to Office 365. My name is Alan Mock. I am a technology solutions professional based out of our New York City office. I specialize in business productivity with a focus on Exchange. I've been with Microsoft for almost 14 years now, and all of which has been dealing with Exchange, whether it be the phone support queues, in the field as a premier field engineer for about 10 years, and now recently as a technology solutions professional. So real quick show of hands, how many have migrated to 2013 public folders already? Even in a lab? Okay, not more than 5. All right, well I guess then you're in the right place, hopefully, to learn about it. How many are coming from 2007? 2010? Anybody still have 2003? Okay. I won't give you the support deal. All right, so in the environment we're going to look at, we actually have 2007 and 2010, and we'll be pulling folders across to 2013. Most of the commandlets we're going to be running are going to be from the 2010 side. So what we'll be looking at today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the limitations of our legacy public folders. And by legacy, we mean anything that's not 2003 or Office 365. So this is going to be Exchange 2007 or 2010. We're going to take a look at our modern public folders, what some of the differences are, how the architecture has changed. Then we're going to get into the current investment areas, or what the product group is actually working on enhancing, so you know what's coming down the pipeline. And hopefully, knock on wood, the migration, because I'm going to do a live migration here, no videos, from going from 2007 and 2010 across to 2013. So you'll get to see me struggle through some of the PowerShell commandlets as well. All right, so let's take a look at some of the limitations or some of the differences with our legacy public folders from 2007 and 2010. And I'm just calling out a few of the differences here. There are a little bit more, but we won't get too in-depth with that. So in Exchange 2007, if you wanted high availability within your public folder infrastructure, you basically had to rely on the old mechanism, which is adding replicas to additional public folder databases, right? And that's done at a folder level, and you would have replicas throughout your environment. So from our HA model perspective, in the 2007 timeframe, we introduced CR, or the various flavors of continuous replication. If you wanted to actually have a public folder database inside of a CCR, or cluster continuous replication, that could actually be the only public folder database that existed inside of your entire organization. For many of you, that wasn't really an option. So from the HA perspective, you would still rely on those replicas, or for small businesses, this may have presented a challenge because there was no real HA option for a single server. And so moving to 2010, we replaced the CCR terms with DAG, so database availability groups, and uses the similar log shipping mechanism. Public folder databases, while they could exist on DAG nodes, they cannot participate in replication. So they were not able to use the log shipping mechanism for high availability inside of the Exchange infrastructure. Sorry. Keeping you on your toes. And now... Nope. think it's good. Yeah. No. All right. Guess it just has to be rebooted sometimes. All right, public folders and the cloud. So with previous versions of Exchange, with 2007 when we had BPOS, anybody run BPOS or remember what that stood for? It's early. Business Productivity Online Suite. So we didn't have the option for public folders there with the exception of our dedicated offerings. And same thing goes with Office 365 with our Wave 14 products or Exchange 2010. Only the dedicated clients could actually have public folders in the cloud. And last on my list of things for legacy public folders and the old way of doing things is actually dealing with troubleshooting. I came from the phone support queues. That was my first gig here at Microsoft. And I was in the Exchange admin queues, supporting every version of Exchange, basically. At that time, it was 4.0 up through 2003. And public folder troubleshooting was a nightmare. Dealing with replicas and figuring out, with the multi-master replication model, like, why is it that my copy in Los Angeles doesn't have the same content as my copy in New York or Chicago? Why isn't it replicating properly? It was a little bit cumbersome. So now what we've done in Exchange 2013, we've now switched to modern public folders. And we've taken the storage out of a separate public folder database, and it goes into public folder mailboxes. These public folder mailboxes exist in your standard mailbox database. Now with this, we have the capability to have the mailbox database participate in database availability groups, and you have the high availability mechanism through log shipping. So we no longer have two separate replication mechanisms for you to worry about from an administrative perspective. There are some additional challenges which we'll talk about later. So you don't have to worry about individual replication from the public folder standpoint where we have that multi-master. It is now a single master model, and your HA is going to only be at the DAG level. All right, so you can have multiple public folder mailboxes across an infrastructure. However, the first one you create will contain the writable copy of the hierarchy. Any subsequent mailboxes that you create will contain read-only copies, and we'll look at the architecture coming up in a few slides as to how that works for when you create new folders. You're able to split out content amongst the various public folders at the folder level. So you cannot have a single public folder with its content divided amongst two separate mailboxes, and we'll illustrate that in a few slides as well. Now the hierarchy will exist in every single public folder mailbox that is in your organization, and that will redirect the clients to the correct content, similar to the way we chased referrals in previous versions of Exchange. From the end user perspective, and we'll say from Outlook, there is no change to the end user for how they're going to access their public folders. And now we also have support in our three different models. So we have on-premises, we have our hybrid models, and we also have straight Office 365. Gives you the capability for accessing public folders. So here's what the infrastructure looks like for the public folders in 2013. So starting at the top, we have our Outlook client, which is going to be accessing our modern public folders, and they can come in through any of these three public folders that are sitting at the bottom. In the middle, we have our primary public folder mailbox. This is going to be the first one that's created. That one contains the writable copy of the hierarchy, and then you'll see the other public folders that we have. On the left side, we have the one that has the hierarchy with a red and a green folder. And on the right-hand side, we have one that has the hierarchy, but also a copy of the yellow folder. So when a client comes in here, they're going to be distributed across the various public folder mailboxes based on a hashing scheme that we use to redirect people. And again, as I mentioned before, they will chase referrals and go towards the content for a particular public folder. So for example, if somebody's connected and accessing their hierarchy through the public folder mailbox on the right, or secondary public folder mailbox 2, and they wanted to gain access to content that existed in the red public folder, they would actually get redirected across to that public folder mailbox to gain access to that content. So how does the hierarchy synchronization actually work in this particular scenario? What happens when clients make changes and changes to the infrastructure? So our Outlook client, we're going to first connect, and we're going to connect to the secondary public folder mailbox, which is number 2. So they'll connect to the one on the right. And for this particular illustration, we're showing here only what exists in the hierarchy. The components that are listed in the white section are actually just folders listed in the hierarchy, not actual content. So they'll access the hierarchy from public folder mailbox 2, and let's say that this client decides to create a new public folder. Since we know that the public folder mailbox 2 does not have the writable copy, what happens is it will get proxied back to the writable copy of the public folder hierarchy. And then that change is accepted, and it is fully accessible then. And now the remainder of the public folder mailboxes in the organization will receive the update to the hierarchy within 15 minutes if users are actually connected to that mailbox, to that public folder mailbox, or within 24 hours if there are actually no users connected. All right, so to review some of the items that were just talked about in the previous architecture slides there, every public folder mailbox will have a copy of the hierarchy. And there is only one writable copy. Now the clients will connect using a load balanced scheme and hashing mechanism within inside of Exchange. However, as an administrator, you have the opportunity using the default public folder mailbox parameter within PowerShell to actually point them to a specific public folder mailbox to gain access to their hierarchy. Why you would actually want to do this, I haven't really come up with a legitimate business case other than for testing post-migration. And we'll talk about that as we walk through some of the PowerShell steps. For those of you that want to know what the underlying architecture looks like, we use the incremental change synchronization, which is similar to what Outlook uses for synchronizing in cached mode to pull down data. That's what we use to actually synchronize our hierarchy across the various public folder mailboxes. Now, content is stored in the various public folder mailboxes. However, unlike previous versions, right, we only have a single copy of any public folder. So your high availability mechanism, again, is going to be relying on DAG. Now, you can actually split up content and put one public folder in one particular public folder mailbox and another public folder in a different public folder mailbox if you choose. So if we take a look at our slides again where we went to the architecture here, you'll see that we have the red and the green folder in our first mailbox, and we have the yellow folder in the second mailbox, and blue and pink in the middle in our primary public folder mailbox. Now, as I mentioned before, you can't take content from, say, the red public folder and divide that into red public folder on mailbox 1, red public folder on mailbox 2. you would have to actually create 2 different folders and divide out that content. This may present some challenges depending on the size of your mailbox limits and the size of your largest public folder. We'll take a look at some of that as I walk through the demo. We'll try and force it to not let us migrate some of the content based on the mailbox size. And last, because we only have that one particular copy of a public folder, that means that all clients that are accessing that particular public folder will be going to the same public folder mailbox. So you may end up seeing that some particular servers have more connections than others based on the type of content that they're using. All right, so what's coming down the pipeline? A couple of investment areas where the product group has heard a lot of feedback and is currently investigating and putting money into increasing limits. How many of you are aware of the public folder limitations that we have for both on-premises and Office 365? Okay, not that many. Okay, and thankfully most of you are sitting in the back. All right, so at the moment we have a limitation of 10,000 public folders in the organization for the migration to go either on-premises or Office 365. We are working on increasing that limitation and increasing the scale. At the same time, also working on increasing the hierarchy synchronization and optimizing performance. Currently, we're only able to get a few hundred folders synchronized at a time. So. Also, from a migration perspective, we've heard a lot of feedback that people would like to do on-premises cross-forest migrations and not just cross-forest going to Office 365. And also increasing the reliability and speed of getting content across with those migrations. From a client connectivity perspective, we're investing in getting EWS access to legacy public folders when your mailbox exists on the 2013 side. How many of you have Outlook for Mac clients? Okay. We'll discuss this again on the next slide, but the Outlook for Mac version cannot access legacy public folders when their mailbox exists on Exchange 2013. Right. And currently we don't have any access to view calendar or contact public folders with inside of Outlook Web Access on 2013, or sorry, Outlook Web App on 2013. And some other areas, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is our auto-split infrastructure. This is with Office 365, kind of our set it and forget it model. So from the migration perspective, we're going to walk through and take a look what the overview looks like, what we have to do to actually prepare the environment. We'll look at our 2007 and 2010 prerequisites, the 2013 prerequisites, as well as the migration, and briefly talk about rolling back a migration. Again, a majority of this is going to be taken up by the demo of the migration. All right, so from an overview perspective, your 2007 and 2010 users cannot access public folders that exist on the Exchange 2013 server or in Office 365. So legacy cannot access modern public folders. However, if you have users that are on Exchange 2013, they can access legacy public folders on 2007 and 2010, except for Outlook for Mac. So that may present some slight migration challenges. We have to try and plan to move your Outlook for Mac users at the same time as you cut over your public folders, or figure out how many of your Outlook for Mac clients are actually using public folders. You could use the suspend when ready to complete flag when doing your mailbox moves for some of those Mac users, and just wait and kind of work with your public folder migration at the same time, and hopefully make it easier to minimize the business impact of having those users be down. All right, so we don't have coexistence as a result of the way our new architecture works. This is basically a cutover process. So while the actual data can exist in both places, in the legacy side and on the new side, they cannot be accessed by clients on both sides. So you're either going to access them on the legacy side or in Exchange 2013. As I mentioned, there will be a very short downtime depending on the size of your environment, I'll say. In this very small lab environment, we'll have a downtime of probably 3 minutes, hopefully, where we actually do the cutover and the final switchover of those particular public folders. For larger environments, this is probably something where you're going to do on a weekend or something during off-business hours, if at all possible. And when the migration is completed, everybody cuts over at the same time. Is it a quick question? Is the process different for Office 365? Yes, there are some additional steps with Office 365, which we'll take a look at. So the question was, is the process actually different for Office 365? We'll take a look at some of those parameters later on. All right, and if you choose to revert or roll back your migration after you've done the cutover, basically all of your changes will be lost from the 2013 or Office 365 side. But you can reactivate your public folders on the legacy side if you choose to. There has to be a very serious reason for wanting to do that, given the fact that there's no easy way to actually pull your data out from the 2013 or Office 365 side. All right, so similar to mailbox moves, we actually rely on the mailbox replication service to migrate our content from the legacy side across to Exchange 2013 and Office 365. And one of the last things that you should do before even attempting to synchronize your content and get it over onto the 2013 and Office 365 side, please ensure healthy replication throughout your environment. As I was transitioning out of my old field role, one of the things that I had conversations with about customers was trying to collapse your public folder environment as much as possible, just to minimize the impact of performing your migration. So that way you can kind of ensure healthier replication. So what do we need from the 2007 and 2010 side? So first off, if you have 2013 already installed in your environment and you have your users migrated, I'm assuming you've already met the prerequisites for service packs and CUs, so I won't get into that. But what we want to do is actually take a snapshot of what the environment looks like. So from this snapshot, we want to actually get a listing of all of the public folders that exist on your 2007 or 2010 side, so that when we go across to the modern public folders and at the end of our migration, we can check to see if there are any issues, maybe something didn't come across correctly, and compare that. So we can also gather our public folder statistics, which will get us information about item sizes, etc. And also permissions, just in case, in the very, very rare instance, I haven't heard of any yet, so knocking on wood, that permissions don't come across for a public folder. And last, before actually attempting the migration, you have to make sure that there is not an existing public folder migration or migration request that was submitted to the queue, because you can only have one at a time. And on that 2013 side is where we're actually going to perform that check to see if there is an existing migration request in the queue. That's going to be processed by the MRS. And if there is an existing request, and these steps will be very similar to what we'll see in a rollback, we're going to remove any of the public folders that exist on the Exchange 2013 side. We're also going to remove any public folder mailboxes as well. All right, now for the fun. And just so you know, so the steps that I'm going to be walking through in PowerShell, there are corresponding slides that will be posted afterwards with all of the steps, and they're well documented out on TechNet, so I always recommend going out there and checking the latest steps, because we do seem to update those periodically. So as of today, these are current. All right, so here we have our demo environment. We have 5 machines. We have a domain controller, an Exchange 2007 server, 2010 box, a 2013 client access, and a 2013 mailbox. So from the DC, we have Outlook installed. And just to give you an idea of this environment, we only have a few users. And the users have already been migrated across to Exchange 2013. So I'm going to log on with our Exchange 2013 user. Going to expand public folders, which still only exist in the legacy infrastructure. Going to connect to a couple of folders here. I'll connect to our LATAM contacts folder and the North America Finance folder, which has a bunch of old posts. So checking the connection status. We have the connection going back to our Exchange 2007 server for accessing public folders and our Exchange 2010 box, while the mailbox is actually connected to Exchange 2013. So we have our public folder access going back to the legacy side. All right, so going over here onto our Exchange 2010 server, let's check out what the public folder infrastructure looks like. So we're going to get our public folders. And again, all of this is going to be recorded and also in the slide deck. So this will take a few moments for this to actually go through. So while we're waiting on that to actually see what that infrastructure looks like, actually I'm going to cheat for something in, we'll go over here. We'll go over to our 2013 side. And on the 2013 side, we're going to check the organization config and make sure that we don't have public folders either locked for migration, as we looked at on the previous slide, or that there was an existing migration that had already completed. So to do this, it's just get organization config. This is fun because you get to watch me struggle with the keyboard here. So we have public folders locked for migration. And we also have public folder migration complete. All right, so both of these values are set to false. That's the expected value. Let's take a look and see. Finally, our list has come back. So we have a very small public folder infrastructure. I'm sure this does not resemble most of your infrastructures. For demonstration purposes and to ensure that this goes off, hopefully on time, we have a smaller environment here, but the steps are essentially the same for larger environments as well. Perhaps just a little more planning and a little more time. All right, so you'll see here we have APAC folders. Those exist on 2007. We have a couple of the folders that have replicas on both 2007 and 2010. We do have some subfolders as well. And let's go over to our 2013 server again. And we're also going to check for a couple of additional items. Besides looking at public folders locked for migration or that the migration completed, we're going to check to see if there is an existing public folder migration request that has been submitted to the MRS. So, like most commandlets, we're going to get the public folder migration request, and it should come back with nothing. That's great. It means there's no actual request that has been submitted. So we have a clean slate. And next thing we're going to do is we're going to get mailbox. And with 2013, we have a new mailbox type called a public folder mailbox. So we'll put in that public folder parameter, and we should get nothing because there are no public folder mailboxes. All right, and last, let's check out and see what our public folders are. Ooh, uh-oh. All right, so we do a get public folder, and it comes back with an error. So what this tells us is that there are no public folders that exist on the 2013 side. So 2013 PowerShell cannot manage your legacy public folder environment. So we'll not see any public folders until they're actually cut across into modern public folders. So this is expected behavior. All right, so going back to the Exchange 2010 server, I'm going to switch into the EX scripts directory. And I have downloaded the latest public folder migration scripts from our website, which help us to perform certain functions that we'll go through here. These are updated periodically as well. There will be a link at the end of this presentation, so if you grab the PowerPoint deck, you can go out to the site and always grab the latest public folder migration scripts. If you've been testing in a lab, don't use the ones from a year ago, because we have made a few changes. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to export our public folder statistics. And we're going to put this out to, call it pfstats.csv. And our public folder, oops. Our public folder server is going to be Exchange 2010. All right, so it enumerated the infrastructure, 15 folders. So what we're going to see here when it actually exports it, it's going to take out both the non-IPM subtree and the IPM subtree. Right, so we have our system folders in there, as well as our regular user folders. So when we take a look at what the CSV has, we'll see that it contains everything including system folders from the legacy side. Now when we use some of our additional scripts, the latest ones actually pull out all of the system folders because those don't need to migrate across with the exception of your org forms. So your eForms folder will actually come across. So what we have here basically is a folder name with the folder path as well as the size listed in bytes. So in this particular infrastructure, our largest public folder should be marketing, which is about 12 megs. So we'll take a look at that and keep that in mind later. All right, so we're going to copy this file across to our 2013 server and then go across to the 2013 side. From here, we'll also go into the Exchange scripts directory. And again, I have the latest public folder migration scripts copied into here, downloaded from the Microsoft site. All right. And the first script that we're going to run, again, pretty much like it's named, is called public folder to mailbox map generator .ps1. So that's a rather long script name, right? So basically what it does is it's going to ingest the file that we created, that CSV file, and it's going to map out how we should break down our public folder infrastructure based on a mailbox size that we're going to specify as a parameter here. So the parameters we give it the import file, which we're going to do the pf stats file that we just brought over. And we'll say we're going to export this to our public folder mapping file, which we're going to use later when we actually perform the migration as sort of a set it and forget it model. And the mailbox size, let's just say we're going to put the mailbox size at a gig. I have nowhere near 1 gigabyte worth of data in this public folder infrastructure, so let's see what happens. So we're waiting for that to go. And in much larger environments, this will take much longer. All right, so we see that it actually created the list after loading the hierarchy, looking at the public folder mailboxes. And it created this file called pfmap.csv. All right, well that's pretty boring. So what we have here is a target mailbox and the folder path. The target mailbox is the suggested name for the public folder mailbox that you should create in the 2013 side. This defaults to mailbox 1, mailbox 2, mailbox 3, etc., and increments up. If you choose to change this naming convention, you can either go into the public folder to mailbox map generator script and modify that parameter, or you can just bring this CSV file into Excel or whatever editor you choose and replace mailbox 1 potentially with local mailboxes based on regions. So we'll take a look at that in a few moments because we actually modified one to suit this environment. All right, so let's play around for a moment and see what happens because we can actually change this. It doesn't have to be 1 megabyte. Let's say we want to make the maximum mailbox size. It doesn't have to be in gigabytes. We could say the max mailbox size is going to be 10 megs. Now we know from before that we had one public folder that actually had 12 megabytes worth of content. So what we get here is that marketing is too big to fit in this particular mailbox. Right, so there's too much marketing material, I guess, in that public folder to fit with our mailbox size limits, which is 10 megs in this case. So we have to actually bump this up to 15. So this may present some challenges for you in your environment, but this will all be done prior to your actual creation of your public folder mailboxes. So if we put that at 15 megs, look at that, it generated it right away. And we see it broke it down into 3 different mailboxes. Right, so based on the size of the particular folders, everything with the exception of our North America root folder and our North America marketing folder will exist in mailbox 1. Anything, and our North America folder is going to exist in mailbox 2, and North America marketing exists in mailbox 3. So based on this, what we should be doing for our upcoming steps is actually creating public folder mailboxes with these names. Mailbox 1, mailbox 2, mailbox 3, again, or whatever parameters you choose or whatever naming convention you choose. So I mentioned we actually created an updated one for you here. This is what we're going to do for our migration. We're going to have regional public folder mailboxes based on our infrastructure and where our end users are located. So we have, for the APAC region, EMEA, LATAM, North America, and other. Not sure where other is, if those are people in Antarctica or outside of Earth. All right, and you'll notice that the system folders are not there, except for the org forms library that comes across, right? So the non-IPM subtree, like things like your store events, your OWA scratchpad, things like that are removed from this process. All right, so our next steps, based on everything that we just did, we're going to create those new public folder mailboxes. And I'm going to do most of this manually through PowerShell. So new mailbox, and we're going to call it with the public folder parameter. Now, what does the first public folder mailbox that we create become? Based on previous slides, just shout it out. The hierarchy, right? So I'm actually going to call this first mailbox, we'll call it public folder hierarchy. CHY. And we need to put in an additional switch, which is hold for migration. So this tells us that this is the first public folder that gets created, and it's basically going to be locked for migration, that only the MRS will have access to this mailbox, as well as transport for delivering messages for mail-enabled public folders. All right, just like that. We have our first public folder, right? So now, public folder mailbox. Now we're going to have to create all of the additional mailboxes. I'm not going to type out each one of them. I'll just type out the first one and then backspace. So we'll do the new mailbox with public folders. And we're also going to include another flag here, which is called is excluded from serving hierarchy. What this does is when we create this particular public folder mailbox, and it's being used for the migration, data is being populated, when we decide to finally cut over the public folders to 2013, nobody can access these public folder mailboxes until we specify that or remove this particular lock. So you'd want to do this in larger environments for testing purposes. You have the capability to assign some test users access to get hierarchy from these mailboxes based on that default public folder mailbox that we talked about before. That will actually override this parameter for is excluded from serving hierarchy. So it should really just be used for testing purposes. All right, so is excluded for serving hierarchy is going to be true. And the name, based on all my naming conventions, PFMB is, first one's going to be APAC. Second one is EMEA, LATAM, NA, and our strange other. All right, so if we get the mailboxes of type public folder, we'll see that we have the 6 mailboxes we created, hierarchy, and the other 5 regional ones. Now comes the fun part. So the next steps are going to be to actually submit the public folder migration request. Okay. Get another PowerShell window open in the background here as well. All right, so this is a rather long commandlet that we're going to be typing. So what we're going to do is we're going to point this to a source database. So this is going to be a public folder database in your legacy infrastructure, right? Because we don't have public folder databases in 2013 anymore anyway. So get public folder database. Ignore that for now. And we'll point this to the server for Exchange 2010. We're going to import or ingest that CSV file that we created before. And again, this is on TechNet. Always check for the latest up-to-date commandlets. Make sure you get them right. All right, so we call this pfmap_updated.csv. The encoding type was byte. Encoding byte. And last, I'm going to put in the bad item limit flag in here just to make sure for demonstration purposes that this actually goes through. And I'll just push that up to 5. Just to make sure for demonstration purposes, because we don't have enough time to go through and really clean up a botched migration if something happens. All right, so before I go through and actually submit this request, I'm just going to kind of cheat in the background because this might go fast. So we can monitor this by doing get public folder migration request and piping that to an even longer commandlet, get public folder migration request statistics. All right, here we go. Hopefully the MRS had its coffee this morning. All right, so we have queued. All right, we see it's creating the hierarchy, 10%. Copying messages, we're at 41% already. This is going faster than expected, 62. Let's see if we see this funny anomaly that happens here. Yep, looks like it's going pretty well. Sometimes you'll see the number go up and down. So like the percentage complete, I've seen it sometimes go up to like 90, then it bounces back to 30. So almost as reliable as copying files across the network and watching that estimated time. All right, so what happens at the end of a migration request, it auto-suspends. So we get to 95%, and then you'll see here we have the status detail shows as auto-suspended. This is what you want to see. This means that we've completed the initial seeding of what existed on the 2007 and 2010 side. So what we're going to do is we will now go and create 2 additional public folders, because I'm sure this might be on somebody's mind. Like what happens if you have public folders that get created that aren't in that mapping file? So what happens during a migration, because you can't be expected to constantly update things, and you can't update that file once a migration request has been submitted. So we're going to create a new top-level public folder. So we'll just call this a new TLF for for a new top-level folder. And we'll also create a new subfolder for North America. Like our commandlets, I'll name my folders what they do, or where they live. All right, so we've created those. Let's go back over to our 2013 server. So we still have everything in auto-suspended, and this will sit in an auto-suspended phase until you, as an administrator, decide to resume the migration and complete everything. For larger organizations, the initial seed can potentially take days, weeks, months, depending on how much data you have. And then there are the deltas. So what you can do here is you would do a get public folder migration request and then pipe that to resume public folder migration request. So you would then perform delta updates periodically, eventually until the deltas got smaller and smaller and smaller, until you were ready to do the final cutover during that designated downtime that you have for your organization. And all this time, users are still accessing public folders on the legacy environment. So they're still accessing everything in 2007 and 2010, business as usual for the end user. Unless you're Outlook for Mac, who's been migrated to 2013. All right, so our next step that we're going to do, we're going to lock out the public folders for migration. Oops. No, we are not going to copy that. Go back to this PowerShell window. Lockout, so the question was, does lockout mean read-only or completely lock out? It means completely locked out. So from this point, we're actually going to go into that transition phase or that short period of downtime where your users are inconvenienced or not able to access their public folders.
You mentioned short time. Is there a per gigabyte type of recommendation? First, you have a couple of megabytes, you're talking about a terabyte public folder.
Yeah, so the question is there a estimate, I'll kind of rephrase it, is there an estimate for how long it can take for this downtime? Yes, I'll get into that shortly just to show you some things you can do to get around it, mostly for smaller organizations though. All right. So we're going to do set organization config with public folders locked for migration, and we're going to set this to true. Now this has to actually get out to all of the public folder stores in your environment and also have to deal with the store cache. So this could potentially take a few hours based on the size of your environment, your replication scheme, and the store cache. So for the purposes of this demo, again, don't recommend doing this in a production environment, potentially unless you have dedicated public folder servers, but I'm going to restart the information store. If you have your public folder databases on mailbox servers, I don't really recommend restarting the information store and inconveniencing all of your users. Unless, of course, you think they're okay with it. So we'll restart the IS on both of those boxes on 2007 and 2010, which are all of the legacy boxes in my infrastructure. We'll start up Outlook again. Let's see what happens. All right, we get this big pop-up, set of folders cannot be opened. Outlook cannot access this public folder right now. Please try again later. Oops, that was the wrong window. All right, so we'll go back to our 2013 box. We'll continue with the migration. So we are running a little bit behind on time with this. Public folder migration request. And we're going to set the public folder migration request with the prevent completion flag to false. So the prevent completion flag is currently set to true, which is what allows it to go into that auto-suspended phase. So when we set this to false, oh, I missed the parameter. So this is prevent completion set to false. All right, so now our final step is to get the public folder migration request. And we're going to pipe this to resume public folder migration request. And this is the same commandlet that you would have done while it was still in that previous phase where you had auto-suspended. You could have just run this particular one-liner to do the delta synchronizations. So we'll resume the migration request. Again, hopefully the MRS is still awake. All right. So sometimes we get this relinquished in the demo environment. Usually in production we don't see this. But in this case, I'm going to actually have to restart the MRS, which is a non-impact service to your end users. So the mailbox replication service, if I just restart that on the mailbox server, go back over here. There we go. It's going into the completion phase. Finalization, still at 95. And 100. Yay, we have completed. So basically at this point, the public folders have now been fully migrated and cut over to the 2013 side. Now, from the end user perspective, however, they're still not able to access the public folders at this point because we have that is excluded from serving hierarchy flag set. So if you recall, we set that before. What we can do over here, let's just take a look at where our public folders are actually living. All right. I'm sure I would have found that out eventually. Identity, and we're going to do content mailbox name. To see where everything lives. All right, so we see that all of these are now transitioned across to our public folders on the 2013 side. Pretty cool. All right, so the next step that we're going to take is we're going to get our mailboxes for the public folders, and we're going to unlock the hierarchy restriction. So we're going to set the mailbox again, and we have the is excluded from serving hierarchy, and we're going to set that to false. And it's going to do that for everyone except for the hierarchy mailbox, which does serve hierarchy, by the way. It just removed the flag before. All right, so that completed. Now let's take a look real quick in the Exchange Admin Center in EAC and where the public folders are. And we can also see that right through PowerShell Remember those public folders that we created before? So what happened to that top level folder that we created, right? We have our new TLF. Any new top level public folders that you create automatically get put into the public folder hierarchy mailbox. So be careful of that. Make sure that maybe your end users don't have rights to create top level public folders, because if they do that, they might end up creating a large amount of content and potentially filling up the hierarchy mailbox. All right, now you'll notice that the other folder I created was a subfolder for North America. Any subfolders automatically get placed in the same public folder mailbox as their parent. Now, through the EAC, this is where you're going to do all of your administration. We won't get too in-depth into this, but we can go in here and manage permissions on the individual folders. We can add in permissions at your client level. You have all of the standard options that you would have in previous versions of Exchange. You can mail enable public folders in here. You can create new public folders, delete public folders. We can drill down like into North America. Eventually, we should see that subfolder. There we go. So we see that North America subfolder, and we can manage permissions there as well. All right, so let's go back over to our domain controller, which has Outlook 2013 and our Exchange 2013 user, and we're going to connect across and hopefully gain access to our public folders. They will show up. Although I'm sure for a lot of you, you would prefer this view. So the way it finds us is through the auto-discover process, and then it gets directed over. Normally, it does not take this long in this environment. Oh, there we go. Excellent. All right, so we have access. There's our new top-level folder. And while it decides to catch up with me, we'll just come over here and take a look where our type is connecting to public folders. We're connecting to various public folder mailboxes as I clicked around through a couple of the public folders very fast in there. So it'll connect for both mail and public folders now to Exchange 2013. So there you go. We've completed the migration and successfully. Is it a quick question? For cleanup after. Yes, so we have some guidance on TechNet where you go back and you remove the public folders from the 2007 and 2010 side and remove the databases. But those public folders are not able to be accessed anyway, so nothing changes. So if you're when you're removing your infrastructure, you can take care of it then. You don't have to do it right away. There is no sync process anymore. Remember, this is a cutover process so that everything is now only accessible on Exchange 2013. So if you have new users that accidentally got created, this may be a help desk or provisioning issue, make sure that all of your new users now get created only on the Exchange 2013 side, if they want to access public folders. If they don't care about public folders, they can exist anywhere. All right, so So the question was, do you have to fix public folders that have backslashes in the name? Yes, you do. You cannot have backslashes in the name, so remediate that prior to migration. So for additional questions, if we could just hold those to the end, because we have a few more items to get through and running low on time. And you're more than, I'll stick around after the session as well to answer questions. So for rollback, as I mentioned before, rollback can be done. It's a few commandlets that you have to issue here, basically unlocking the public folders for migration, which then gains access back to those legacy public folders again in 2007 and 2010, removing all the infrastructure from the 2013 side, and effectively losing any delta changes that happened post-migration. So how do you get to Office 365 and for Exchange Online? So given the show of hands before, for how many people were looking at migrating, it might be a little while before some of you actually get there. The migration steps are slightly different. There are just a few additional things here and some additional parameters. You need to set up accepted domains to make sure that your mail-enabled public folders are routing correctly. If you don't have mail-enabled public folders, then this really isn't an issue. You'll have to use the export and import scripts, which are contained in that download that'll be linked at the end of the presentation, to export the information for those mail-enabled folders. And then when you do submit your new public folder migration request, it's going to actually use Outlook Anywhere to gain access to some of the content, and you are going to need to put in some of the Outlook Anywhere parameters that are listed here. And also just to make sure you get the authentication type correct, either NTLM or BASIC for your auth for Outlook Anywhere. There's no way to update a public folder migration request, so you'll have to remove the existing request and then resubmit it with the proper parameters after that. So from a management perspective, we will use the Exchange Admin Center to go through our management of public folders, as well as EMS, or the Exchange Management Shell. You cannot manage any legacy public folders once they're cut across, again, because they shouldn't be accessed anyway, unless, of course, you're rolling back your migration, in which case you would use legacy tools to manage those. The legacy commandlets, however, still exist, so we've kept the same structure, right, for managing your public folders. So you can do things like get public folder client permissions, get public folder, so any commandlets you used to use in 2010 should exist for the most part in 2013 and Office 365. For your on-premises deployments, if you are getting close to the maximum mailbox size for your public folder mailboxes, you might want to split these off into a brand new mailbox. So I have a couple of screenshots of a demo that I walked through where we split out a public folder infrastructure for our APAC public folders here. Now we recommend trying keeping your public folder mailboxes somewhere around 60% to try to manage it and allow room for growth. Your mileage may vary, and it depends on how you want to manage your environment. So before the split, if you look at the APAC region, there are 4 public folders that we have there. There's APAC, APAC Calendar, Help Desk, and Finance. And when we split that off, right over here, we're going to see that right over here, we have APAC Finance, APAC, and APAC Calendar are the ones that are actually going to be split off. So it's going to leave the Help Desk one behind. All right. All right, and you'll see there that we now have our public folders split, and the only one that didn't go across was, was the finance one. Is that right? Am I reading that right? Yeah. So it didn't get split. All right, additional planning information that we have here, just some additional tips, some things that I've run into over some time. I mentioned before that the public folder hierarchy is discovered by Outlook through auto-discover. So make sure your auto-discover is functioning correctly in your environment. And it's not auto-discovery, otherwise Greg Taylor will hunt you down. So we use that hashing scheme that I told you about before, where we go across and try and find and load balance the hierarchy across the various public folder mailboxes. We use the incremental change synchronization, and we typically get somewhere around 500 to 600 public folders per minute for replicating the hierarchy and hierarchy changes. And those are some of the scalability improvements that they're trying to work on. Now, for larger organizations, this last one can be somewhat of a pain point. Because we don't have the multi-master replication model anymore, if you have particular public folder content that is being accessed across a link with higher latency or slower bandwidth, you may choose to actually have users add folders to their favorites inside of Outlook so that it synchronizes to their OST file. And then they also have to monitor to make sure they're not filling up their disk space locally. But that will make it available offline for them. From the management perspective, there is no EX folders. For those of you who are not familiar with that, it was just another management tool that we had, similar to like PFDev admin in earlier versions. However, we do support single item recovery now. Full text searching, retention policies are there. Are not available. However, we do have our age limits that are available, so you still have that feature parity with the previous versions. All right, so there are a couple of additional sessions you might want to check out for some additional public folder information. The tips and tricks session, performance, and the migration experiences from the field. If you want to walk through a migration, there's actually a hands-on lab that you can go through, and that does do a public folder cutover. If I don't get to answer your questions today, I will be working in the Office Server and Services booth in the Go Deploy section. It's right on the aisle. I will not be there today, but I will be there tomorrow around noonish and on Thursday around noon as well. And I'll be at the Ask the Experts session tonight. And as promised, there are a lot of links here. Several of them, some of them linking out to some of the content for the scripts. Please, again, go ahead and make sure you download the latest scripts. And this will be posted up on the site for you guys to download later. And also over by the Office booth, come by and check out the Garage series. We have a bunch of interviews going on and just short nuggets. If you're there, there's stuff going on during lunch, so if you're actually eating lunch somewhere else, you want to bring it over and check it out. It's actually kind of cool, some of the people that we pull in there. Sure you've seen some of these slides before. Your other resources, everything's going to be recorded and will be available on demand on Channel 9 after Tech Ed. And please fill out your evaluations. You can win cool stuff. I can't. You can. So to fill out the eval, you can go out to the site or use the QR code. Now, please fill out the evaluation. I will say good surveys are appreciated, but honesty is appreciated even more. If there's something that could use improvement throughout the presentation, please let me know so that I can improve this for the next time, or something that could be added, something that worked well. So with that, that's all I have. I have about a minute for questions, but I can stick around afterwards as well. So thanks for everybody for coming at 8:30 in the morning.
Megabytes per minute on migration during that cutover period?
Okay, so one of the questions was the cutover period, if there's a time frame. So the time frame is not down to the megabytes.
Okay.
It's about how long the change can actually replicate to the public folder stores.
Okay.
So there's no actual content replication. It's really just the change about the locking out the public folders for migration.
Yeah.
And the additional public folder stores in the organization have to pick up that change. Okay. So that could take you a couple of hours.
Okay, so we're not talking like, I mean, you have a terabyte of public folders, and it could be a year of copying back and forth.
Correct, so it's data independent.
Data independent.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Office for Mac, you said that it does not access public?
So Office for Mac, to clarify, it does access public folders if the mailbox exists on Exchange 2013 and the public folders are on 2013. If the mailbox exists on 2013 and the public folders have not been cut over yet and they still live in 2007 and 2010, they cannot access those public folders. So the suggestion for now for the guidance is to actually migrate your Mac users at the same time that you cut over your public folders. Okay. All right. Yep.
Replication around the globe, when you have favorites, you then cut over to the replicate again.
Okay, so I have to repeat these for the. Sorry. So the question was about. Are you still recording? Okay. The question was about replication of adding something to favorites in your old environment or the legacy environment and then cutting over to the 2013 environment. Does it pull down the content again? It should not. It should still get the same public folder information.
How much cross-forest support is available?
So cross-forest support currently does not exist for public folder migrations for on-premises deployments. From that, if you remember the investment slide,
Yeah, I did see that.
we're currently working on trying to get that to you guys.
Okay. Should we wait or should we do a 2010 in the community forest? Yeah, that was. What do you guys want to do there?
At this time, I can't make a recommendation for it. Unfortunately, it just is what it is at the moment that there is no.
Not being able to do that. So. I know it's not your fault, but I just.
Understood.
Will the 2010 with IRF will work? Just bring it across like that? Yeah.
Yeah, so you would have to do it in the legacy side first. So there's no cross-forest migration to modern public folders. So if you did it in your legacy environment first and did like 2007 or 2010 cross-forest, and then in the same forest with that added 2013, that works. So it's an additional step, and I know it's a pain point.
Unless you guys are going to fix it.
Or go to Office 365. So any plans of getting rid of public folders? Not at this time. You may have heard the rumors, of course. For years, I've been in exchange with Microsoft my entire time here. And I've heard rumors all the time. Public folders are going away now. And you look at our support life cycle. So Exchange 2013 released on 10/11/12, right? So that was October 11th, 2012. So we have at least until the following quarter, 10 years from that time. So you're looking at January 2023 for when public folders will go out of support.
Public folders on online, Exchange Online?
Yes.
Is the transition pretty much the same as Exchange 2010 to 2013 with additional script caveats? Or?
Yes, so the question is about, is the transition to online pretty much the same? And yes, the transition is about the same. Just a few additional parameters to run, and dealing with the mail-enabled public folders is slightly different because you have to ensure that you have the routing set correctly.
Do you still run into the same Mac issue? Or
Correct. Yes, because Office 365 is giving you the Exchange 2013 version in the cloud.
And is there any limitation on the public folder size?
Public folder size.
On the online version?
Yes, the online version, you'll be limited to 50 gig for a public folder mailbox. For the individual folder, I would have to double check that again. But for on-prem, it could be as large as your public folder mailbox is going to be. Yep.
You can access public folder calendars through the web app?
Correct. So that was also on the investment slide. Currently being investigated is whether is to provide access to calendaring and contact public folders within inside of OWA. Currently, it's only through MAPI clients.
If I only wanted to migrate selected public folders to 365, would that control through the scripts?
You could do a selective. No, not really. So if you want to migrate selected public folders, what would you do with the rest of them?
Archive, leave them behind.
Leave them behind? Okay. I would recommend just removing them from your infrastructure first and then do your migration after that. Sure. It is now a single master model, and your HA is going to only be at the DAG level. All right, so you can have multiple public folder mailboxes across an infrastructure. However, the first one you create will contain the writable copy of the hierarchy. Any subsequent mailboxes that you create will contain read-only copies, and we'll look at the architecture coming up in a few slides as to how that works for when you create new folders. You're able to split out content amongst the various public folders at the folder level. So you cannot have a single public folder with its content divided amongst two separate mailboxes, and we'll illustrate that in a few slides as well. Now, the hierarchy will exist in every single public folder mailbox that is in your organization, and that will redirect the clients to the correct content, similar to the way we chased referrals in previous versions of Exchange. From the end user perspective, and we'll say from Outlook, there is no change to the end user for how they're going to access their public folders. And now we also have support in our 3 different models. So we have on-premises, we have our hybrid models, and we also have straight Office 365. Gives you the capability for accessing public folders. So here's what the infrastructure looks like for the public folders in 2013. So starting at the top, we have our Outlook client, which is going to be accessing our modern public folders, and they can come in through any of these 3 public folders that are sitting at the bottom. In the middle, we have our primary public folder mailbox. This is going to be the first one that's created. That one contains the writable copy of the hierarchy. And then you'll see the other public folders that we have. On the left side, we have the one that has the hierarchy with a red and a green folder. And on the right-hand side, we have one that has the hierarchy, but also a copy of the yellow folder. So when a client comes in here, they're going to be distributed across the various... I think it's good. Yeah. All right. Guess it just has to be rebooted sometimes. All right, public folders and the cloud. So with previous versions of Exchange, with 2007 when we had BPOS, anybody run BPOS or remember what that stood for? It's early. Business Productivity Online Suite. So we didn't have the option for public folders there with the exception of our dedicated offerings. And same thing goes with Office 365 with our Wave 14 products or Exchange 2010. Only the dedicated clients could actually have public folders in the cloud. And last on my list of things for legacy public folders and the old way of doing things is actually dealing with troubleshooting. I came from the phone support queues. That was my first gig here at Microsoft. And I was in the Exchange admin queues, supporting every version of Exchange, basically. At that time, it was 4.0 up through 2003. And public folder troubleshooting was a nightmare. Dealing with replicas and figuring out with the multi-master replication model, like, why is it that my copy in Los Angeles doesn't have the same content as my copy in New York or Chicago? Why isn't it replicating properly? It was a little bit cumbersome. So now what we've done in Exchange 2013, we've now switched to modern public folders. And we've taken the storage out of a separate public folder database, and it goes into public folder mailboxes. These public folder mailboxes exist in your standard mailbox database. Now with this, we have the capability to have the mailbox database participate in database availability groups, and you have the high availability mechanism through log shipping. So we no longer have two separate replication mechanisms for you to worry about from an administrative perspective. There are some additional challenges, which we'll talk about later. So you don't have to worry about individual replication from the public folder standpoint, where we have that multi-mask, various public folder mailboxes based on a hashing scheme that we use to redirect people. And again, as I mentioned before, they will chase referrals and go towards the content for a particular public folder. So for example, if somebody's connected and accessing their hierarchy through the public folder mailbox on the right, or secondary public folder mailbox 2, and they wanted to gain access to content that existed in the red public folder, they would actually get redirected across to that public folder mailbox to gain access to that content. So how does the hierarchy synchronization actually work in this particular scenario? What happens when clients make changes and changes to the infrastructure? So our Outlook client, we're going to first connect, and we're going to connect to the secondary public folder mailbox, which is number 2. So they'll connect to the one on the right. And for this particular illustration, we're showing here only what exists in the hierarchy. The components that are listed in the white section are actually just folders listed in the hierarchy, not actual content. So they'll access the hierarchy from public folder mailbox 2, and let's say that this client decides to create a new public folder. Since we know that the public folder mailbox 2 does not have the writable copy, what happens is it will get proxied back to the writable copy of the public folder hierarchy. And then that change is accepted, and it is fully accessible then. And now the remainder of the public folder mailboxes in the organization will receive the update to the hierarchy within 15 minutes if users are actually connected to that mailbox, to that public folder mailbox, or within 24 hours if there are actually no users connected. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have a demo that might take up a decent portion of this. So hopefully everybody's here for the Exchange public folder migration session. The main focus of this is going to be an on-premises deployment, and we'll walk through the demo there and also take a look at some of the steps for migrating to Office 365. My name is Alan Mock. I am a technology solutions professional based out of our New York City office. I specialize in business productivity with a focus on Exchange. I've been with Microsoft for almost 14 years now, and all of which has been dealing with Exchange, whether it be in the phone support queues, in the field as a premier field engineer for about 10 years, and now recently as a technology solutions professional. So real quick show of hands, how many have migrated to 2013 public folders already? Even in a lab? Okay, not more than 5. All right, well I guess then you're in the right place, hopefully to learn about it. How many are coming from 2007? 2010? Anybody still have 2003? Okay. I won't give you the support deal. All right, so in the environment we're going to look at, we actually have 2007 and 2010, and we'll be pulling folders across to 2013. Most of the commandlets we're going to be running are going to be from the 2010 side. So what we'll be looking at today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the limitations of our legacy public folders. And by legacy, we mean anything that's not 2003 or Office 365. So this is going to be Exchange 2007 or 2010. We're going to take a look at our modern public folders, what some of the differences are, how the architecture has changed. Then we're going to get into the current investment areas, or what the product group is actually working on enhancing, so you know what's coming down the pipeline. And hopefully, knock on wood, the migration, because I'm going to do a live migration here, no videos, from going from 2007 and 2010 across to 2013. So you'll get to see me struggle through some of the PowerShell commandlets as well. All right, so let's take a look at some of the limitations or some of the differences with our legacy public folders from 2007 and 2010. And I'm just calling out a few of the differences here. There are a little bit more, but we won't get too in-depth with that. So in Exchange 2007, if you wanted high availability within your public folder infrastructure, you basically had to rely on the old mechanism, which is adding replicas to additional public folder databases, right? And that's done at a folder level, and you would have replicas throughout your environment. So from our HA model perspective, in the 2007 timeframe, we introduced CR, or the various flavors of continuous replication. If you wanted to actually have a public folder database inside of a CCR, or cluster continuous replication, that could actually be the only public folder database that existed inside of your entire organization. For many of you, that wasn't really an option. So from the HA perspective, you would still rely on those replicas, or for small businesses, this may have presented a challenge because there was no real HA option for a single server. And so moving to 2010, we replaced the CCR terms with DAG, so database availability groups, and uses the similar log shipping mechanism. Public folder databases, while they could exist on DAG nodes, they cannot participate in replication. So they were not able to use the log shipping mechanism for high availability inside of the Exchange infrastructure. Sorry, keeping you on your toes.
And now